Good evening. Welcome to the opening lecture of the 41st Annual MUFON International Symposium. If I could have everybody come on in and take your seats. For any student in the field of ufology, our next speaker truly needs no introduction. For his first book, UFOs in the National Security State, Volume 1, he created ripples throughout the UFO community about how in-depth his study truly was. His sequel, Volume 2 of UFOs in the National Security State, was one of the most anticipated sequels to any UFO book quite possibly ever. And now I just learned that he's got a third coming out, all about the era of our culture after disclosure, when that period comes where we finally realize that we are not alone. Let me welcome to the stage author and historian, Mr. Richard Dolan.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm told that if I get echo, I should just speak louder. They said that's the solution. I'd like to thank Clifford Cliff for inviting me out. John, thank you very much for that introduction. Karen and I are delighted to be here. As always, I love coming to the MUFON Symposium. Those two first volumes of history, the second volume was the one that hung over my head for too many years. In fact, both of our children grew up, it was only just called The Book. Our kids are 14 and 11 now. I'm thinking they were 7 and 9. At least for the last 5 years. They grew up in a house where I had this albatross around my neck. Am I ever going to get this thing done? When it was finished last year, it was one of the happiest days of my life, I think. No kidding. And what's crazy is that it's a year later and I've got another book coming out, but it's not volume 3 of UFOs in the National Security State. It's something a little different. When I announced this to people on my Facebook page, everything's Facebook now, wouldn't you know it, people wrote and said, well, that's just great, Rich, but is this going to delay volume 3? Which I don't think will be delayed. I actually believe that book will be done in 2012. I think it'll be done on December 2012. December 21st-ish. It's my plan. I think that should work just fine. It might be a day or two late, in which case, So this book that I'm working on, I'm co-authoring this book, let me just say. It's called AD After Disclosure, and we have a subtitle to it called The People's Guide to Life After Contact. And the whole thing about UFOs disclosure has been so played out in a lot of ways. I think it's fair to say in this room, there's probably a full range of opinions on what that might be, how ridiculous the thought is, or how, it's going to happen any minute. Kind of like Paul talking about the return of Jesus anytime now. There are people like that, and there are others who say it's just never going to happen. I've always been of the opinion that it is inevitable. And it's a theme that has drawn me for the last couple of years more and more. I've been working it increasingly into lectures that I've given. This particular lecture is a completely new lecture, by the way, I would point out. And in fact, some of you saw me working on it out in the lobby earlier today. I came to this, though, just by thinking about, what would happen if? What if? So it's one of these topics that you don't really have to believe in disclosure. You don't even have to believe in UFOs. If you really wanted to approach it in a safe way, you could ask yourself, well, what would happen if there was a conspiracy or secrecy on UFOs, and what would happen if it ended? Because all of us, I'm sure, have thought about that at some point or another. My co-author is Bryce Zabel, and he's the fellow who created and produced the television show Dark Skies back in the late 1990s. Those of you who remember it would certainly remember it as an extremely well-done historical attempt to recreate the UFO conspiracy during the 1960s. Well, what Bryce and I discovered is that we hit it off very well. We're very simpatico in how we look at this topic, and we also feel that our skills complement each other very well. One thing led to another, and we started writing this book in, I think, April is when we really got going, and it's now just about done. We'll have it out in the fall. So that's a little bit about how it came out. I'd like to talk about it. What would happen? Just imagine how our lives would change. I will jump ahead and just say that one of the things that I take away from having done this fascinating study is how radical the secrecy of UFOs is, how radical the change will be, how important this topic is. Because once we went through, because we try to go through a very feet-on-the-ground type of approach. We're very happy to speculate on the future, but in a very pragmatic sense. So let me just walk through the slides that I took the time to prepare rather than ramble on like I've just been doing. If you think about the length of the secrecy of UFOs, it's been about one lifetime, if you want to get into the modern era, the 1940s. Just about 7 decades, just about 7 decades. I look at the secrecy, the structure of secrecy of UFOs as an immovable object that's dealing with an irresistible force, and that irresistible force is the phenomenon itself and the truth concerned with it. You've got these two very powerful things intersecting with each other. And for 70 years, that secrecy more or less has held. But I would suggest to you that the result has been a deformation of our society. Anytime you've got something that's as big a reality as what appears to be a non-human intelligence, or let's even more generically say, an intelligence not of our civilization, that is affecting our world year after year, that is forcing the scrambling of military jets from many nations, that forces silence over the media, silence over the political system, a dogmatic conformity over the scientific and academic communities. Anytime you get something like that, it deforms your society, it twists your society in ways that it shouldn't be. But because we all live in that, I think it's hard for us to appreciate just how bad the situation has become. You could say that the secrecy has held for roughly 70 years. You could say that all attempts to end secrecy have ended in utter failure, and you'd be partially right, but you'd also be partially wrong. After all, I subtitled my last volume of history of UFOs in a national security state, The Cover-Up Exposed. I did that for a reason. It so happened that during the 1970s, the cover-up of UFOs was truly exposed. It wasn't ended, but it was exposed in the sense that very good researchers filing reports through the Freedom of Information Act and doing investigation into crash retrievals of UFOs and so forth did expose the UFO cover-up. There was progress made. There is always progress. I liken the attempts to attain a disclosure to like a sporting event or like a hockey game. You're not going to score a goal unless you get a lot of shots on goal. You got to keep trying. We had attempts in the 1950s, 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, our own previous decade now, in which it looked like maybe, just maybe, it might happen this time. And then it didn't happen. But just because it didn't happen in the past is absolutely no indicator that it will not happen in the future. And in fact, I'm going to argue why it will happen. It's going to happen because history doesn't stand still. That's the first reason. We're in 2010. 2010 is a little different from 1990. It's a little different from 1950. We're in a different world now than we were then. I'll get into that in a little more in a moment. I do have a faith. I have a faith in the value of truth. I do think that it is an irresistible force, and I do believe that it is inevitable that at some point, between now and some point in the future, this truth is going to be known. And so the question is, when are we going to hit that point along the timeline? I'm of the opinion that most likely there's going to be a major event that does it. There's a couple of other possibilities. And then I mentioned down here the big picture, our rate of change. I did kind of cobble this together at the last minute, and this is my... So what am I trying to say here? The big picture of our world is that we are in the most dramatic change of human history that's ever occurred. All right, more than the invention of fire, more than the invention of the wheel, the period that we're in right now is the most transformative in all of human history. And so to expect that nothing is going to change as a result of UFO secrecy, even though our entire civilization is reinventing itself almost every single day, that to me is foolishness. So how could it happen? It's a couple of possibilities. Some of these have been almost close. An artifact, or maybe something even more significant, finds its way to a civilian lab that does an analysis. This has already happened, okay? But it could happen again, and maybe the next time it happens, it might have a little more resonance. A new crash occurs, and maybe the military doesn't get to it first. Is it possible? It might be possible. A government other than one of the main co-conspirators announces what it has. Many people have speculated on India, on China. They're probably in the program. I think that they are. But nonetheless, it's still a big world out there. It's not totally monolithic. It is not completely totalitarian. My own personal bet is some kind of mass sighting. It's only been in the last 5 years that people have had like these really great little personal devices that aren't even cell phones anymore. They've got cameras, video. The quality of those is very poor, but it's not going to be poor forever. At some point, something is going to happen, and a lot of people are going to get it. There's stuff going on in China right now, and what we're seeing, of course, is the media hacks, probably people right out of the intelligence community, that'd be my bet, going to work and disabling the whole thing. But nonetheless, you see, this is a phenomenon that doesn't die. It won't stop. And I believe that at some point, something big will happen, bigger than Phoenix, bigger than Stevensville, and it's going to happen, and it'll be an undeniable event. There could be a public confession, a deathbed confession of somebody, powerful and famous. There have been a lot of very, very major figures who've made incredible statements about the UFO reality. In fact, Leslie Kean has just published an outstanding book on this topic, major statements by high-level government and aviation people and so forth. Nonetheless, none of these statements have been at the level of the highest, most prominent types of individuals in our society. It could happen. Maybe some foreign declassification effort breaks through. Or even a good investigative journalist. We laugh because they just avoid the topic, but I would hazard to say that my own work is based on trying to provide a solid, strong historical foundation for this topic. There are other people out there who are trying to do serious work on this. I don't think it's forever that we're going to have failure in these. It could be whoever these others are. Bryce and I, my co-author, decided we like the phrase others because aliens sounds a little too like we already know who they are. And frankly, I don't think we do know who they are. Extraterrestrials, well, if they're from another planet, okay, maybe, but what if they're not? So I don't know what they are. I'll call them others for safety. Maybe they'll make a decision. Will it be like this, Independence Day? Let's hope not. Or V? I doubt it. Someone gets lucky with a camcorder? Yes, I think that's a real possibility. Some great, amazing things that are in the skies. Not all of them are aliens, but some of them are pretty fascinating. I don't know what the hole punch phenomenon is all about. New technologies, as I've been saying, look, this is 2010. It's not 1990, and it's also not 2030 or 2040. What will the world be like in 2040? What will the world be like in 2060? All right. So for us to say that this secret is going to continue all this time, when we are on the verge of reinventing our society, our civilization, and ourselves, again, I think, is silliness. So let's hypothesize. There's an event, whatever that event is, some big thing in the sky. People see it. What would happen? What I think would happen, majestic, let's call them that, they debate. They sit down. Maybe they did this after Stevensville. Maybe they did this after Phoenix. I bet they did. I'm taking a guess. And they might say, all right, this is a situation. We need to talk about this. Are we going to have a plan? Is this going to result in us doing anything? Well, every single time up till now, whenever they've discussed this, presumably they said no. They've got some good reasons. When my co-author and I tried to come up with the reasons pro and con, there were many, many more negative answers. One, the world has too many problems already. This one will lead to massive government gridlock. People don't care. They want us to handle this quietly anyway. They got too much to do in their lives. The public's right to know is not an absolute. Then, of course, they have to worry about loss of credibility in government, in themselves, once the lies are revealed. Telling the truth leads to unpredictable results. There's no such thing as a little bit of disclosure. Right, and they can't be a little bit pregnant, and okay. But it's really true. It's very hard to do a little bit of disclosure. I'll get more into that in a moment. There's still more reasons to vote no. Because perhaps, here's one. Not all of us have thought of this. Is it possible that by acknowledging who these others are, we're somehow inviting them into our world in greater numbers? I've heard a couple of people wonder about that. And then there's the possibility of violent human reactions, panic, that might compel us to act aggressively and trigger a hostile response. And then there's the possibility that we, I'm using this word loosely here, humanity, the military, feels that they need more time to develop weapons systems. We're not ready yet, right? Then there's the economy. The economy of the world is based on the status quo. The truth might create another Great Depression. National unity might be weakened because people will demand a global response. And then we, that is majestic, the government, whomever these guys are, may have to acknowledge our complicity in things like the abduction and mutilation phenomenons, among other nasty little things. Still, there might be people who would want to vote yes. The world has a lot of problems, okay, but maybe the world has too many problems to ignore this one anymore. Maybe this one has to be brought out into the open to help resolve some of those problems. That might be an answer. The public does have a right to know, might be a response. Again, no matter what the truth is. We've had long enough to assess the situation. It is now time to act. Technologies that have been developed in secret can be unleashed for the betterment of humankind. Might be one thing they would say. Another thing would probably be that people are more open to the reality than they were in the past. I think that's certainly true. And then, if there's a major event, they might just say, following this major new event or revelation, complete denial is no longer credible. It's best to control the spin on the subject rather than let it run wild. And then, probably the main reason would be the world already knows. If it's a big, big thing that everyone has seen, then you have to make some kind of statement. So you can just imagine someone is appointed by Majestic to go tell the president. Well, what do we tell the president? Because we boss him around on this. So you have the president giving his press conference, telling the world, and that might look like that. So what I want to explore with you now is how the immediate response might just unfold. Spin control is the absolute priority. Here's the thing. Look, put yourself in the position of the president. It's easy for us on the outside, banging at the door, wanting the truth out, wanting something like disclosure to say, just tell the damn truth. But it may not be that simple, right? So if you're the president, what if you discover that the truth is maybe not necessarily a pleasant thing? You've got almost 7 billion people on the planet now to think about when you make a statement, and you've got to be very careful with how you position this information. You might say, okay, we're not alone, relations are peaceful, no need to panic, we'll take a nice measured response to this. That would be what a president might want to say. The president might decide just how frightened he or she will want the public to be for whatever purposes. Sometimes a little bit of fear might be good from the president's point of view. Sometimes too much fear is a real problem. You might say, we're under threat, but we've got the capability to respond. We are consulting with other governments. The military has a plan and significant ability to implement if necessary. We'll see how long that sticks. The question is, how much disclosure? Do you do a full disclosure? Probably not. There's one attractive aspect to that, which is that by dumping thousands and thousands of papers and DVDs and videos and everything else you've got, you give this impression that you're coming clean with everything. And that therefore you're coming out with the information. And you could actually, withhold certain things that you think you're able to withhold by giving the appearance that it's a full disclosure. That's a possibility. I think that this will not happen only because I think the second solution, the partial disclosure, i.e. the death by 1,000 cuts, is much more attractive. It's attractive in the sense that giving a little bit of information is still going to be more appealing, I think, than giving a lot, because it allows you a better chance at controlling the spin. I mean, frankly, a full disclosure immediately is going to be impossible. You'd have to have a massive amount of data vetted by declassification specialists. You'd have to have too many people looking this stuff over. It's very unlikely, okay, that they're going to have all of these things ready at a moment's notice to say, here we go. That will not happen. So it's going to have to come out by drips and drabs, most likely. We can assume that the powers that be will be scrambling just as much as anyone else to decide what exactly they're going to say to people. I think it's very possible that the official statements and official acknowledgments would downplay the current and past UFO phenomenon to some extent, maybe not totally, but they certainly might. There's really no reason why they might want to say, yeah, we've actually been lying completely on everything. They might say, well, there have been some UFOs, but not as many as you researchers think, that type of thing. I could see that happening. But see, at a certain point, all of that sounds really great, but everyone's going to want to say, show us the alien, show us the craft, show us the wreckage. And this might be very difficult to do. It might be impossible to do. They may not wish to do this. Now, if we've got a couple in captivity, maybe that can be different. But I could see this being a real problem. And if they don't appear physically, we're going to have a serious problem within society of many people not believing that disclosure. They're going to have a very high level for what's going to constitute truth for them. So I don't know how they're going to get around that. That could be a real difficulty. I think there'll be a military high alert in the immediate aftermath of this. I think all the militaries of the world will be working overtime. Will we have Star Wars type weapons out there, ground-based lasers, which might be effective? I don't know what else we're going to have against objects that can stop, take off instantly, zoom up into the atmosphere instantaneously, loiter indefinitely, and then just go wherever they want. That might be very difficult on a military basis for us to deal with. Martial law, I think martial law will be declared in many parts of the world. I think that, at least in the immediate term, people are going to be a lot more dangerous than the aliens. Of course, let's keep in mind that the martial law might not be declared in every case for the most altruistic reasons. I mean, in fact, when is martial law declared for altruistic reasons? That's putting my foot in my mouth. I guess I want to say it this way. Martial law might be declared for legitimate reasons of public safety, but it might also be declared for political opportunism. The media. It'll be very interesting to observe the media in the immediate post-disclosure moments. I mean, they've been ragging on us for 70 years now, those guys. I have a feeling they're going to not miss a beat, and they're just going to go, right from the jokes, and now they're just going to it's going to be serious. Maybe one day, that might be the only day. And then after that, it's just like nothing ever happened. And they're going to start pointing the finger at whatever scapegoat is going to be a convenient scapegoat. They're still going to be controlled by the intelligence community, so I really can't expect that they're going to be all that useful. The only thing, though, is that after this initial shock and awe, I believe it's very likely that it's not going to end there. So there's going to be this battle over the truth. So the initial statement will be something that tries to manage that truth, maybe for very legitimate purposes, it's okay, but it's going to be very difficult to contain. There's going to be a lot of questioning people, and then the issue, I think, may very well become who gets to control the public discourse here. Inevitable questions are going to arise. How have you kept the secret all these years? The very structure of the secrecy. In other words, how is it that the mainstream media has been so complicit? They couldn't have been that stupid, okay? Those are smart people. Well, all it's going to take is some analysis of the structure of the media hierarchy to recognize how it is, very much part of the whole structured power of our society. The academic world, same thing. Scientific community, obviously the same thing. The world of science is almost at times identical, I think, with the world of national security, who hires so many of these scientists. So I think all of that will have to come out. Then other questions are going to arise. What is the status of our secret technology? Because it will become evident that we've got secret technology programs. People are going to want to know. Will they find out? Then, of course, we'll come to abductions. Are people being abducted? Well, suddenly it's not going to seem so crazy to the mainstream if you acknowledge that there are other intelligences here. That's always the main hurdle to the abduction acceptance, not really anything else. If you accept that there are other beings here, it doesn't sound so crazy to acknowledge that all of these millions, or at least many, many thousands of people who've claimed to have been abducted, maybe we're actually recollecting things accurately. Then, of course, we get a little deeper. Who are these other beings? Where are they from? What do they want? Are we safe? These will be the questions that come up. Well, let's talk about who they are. When I started researching this, it was about 15 years ago. That's nothing compared with some of the people in this room. But 15 years, it's enough for me to ponder about it a little bit. I remember beginning and thinking very kind of conventionally, I guess, assuming that this is an extraterrestrial type of phenomenon. That is, let's say, once I was convinced that there is a reality to the phenomenon, I thought the most logical solution is extraterrestrial. I still think that it is, but I do think that there are other possibilities out there. Are dimensions important in this? Sometimes I think they are. Is there a lost civilization? The more I think about it, maybe the less crazy it sounds. Is there a hole in our ancient history that we really haven't figured out? Were there people who attained certain levels of technology that were maybe kept it secret to themselves, developed this technology independent of the nation-state system? Well, I think it's a long shot, certainly, but I don't think I would totally rule it out. Are they intelligent machines? This has been a theory, pet theory of mine for a number of years, and I think that intelligent machines absolutely factor into this in several ways. Are they related to the traditional demons and angels of ancient time? I wouldn't say no. Is time travel involved? I don't really know. I leave it open. But I guess let me just say that, you know, the real difficulty of writing a book after disclosure is this exact issue. I'm not going to pretend that I have the answer. And I'm not going to pretend that I know exactly how it's going to play out. What I can say is that I think there are certain things that will happen within our very human society as a result of this, no matter who they are. And that's something that I will continue onward here. So, their intentions, what do they want? They may possibly want not very much to do with us. I think it's possible. Certainly they've interacted with us for what appears to be a long time, but that doesn't mean that we're at the top of their agenda. They may have other things that interest them much more. They may just want to be here for other reasons. Maybe they live here sometimes. Maybe Earth is a really important place for them, independent of the human race. There are reasons to believe that some of these entities are peaceful. Look, sometimes they take people, and not all of these experiences are reported as horrific. Not all of them are reported as violations. Excuse me. There are people who claim to have had very, very beneficent contact with some of these entities. And I'm not here to say that I don't accept those. I think that could be very much part of the picture. There are reasons to believe otherwise, however. There are reasons to be wary of who these others are, whatever they are. They might be interested in our DNA. I mean, just consider, we have only now really mapped the human genome, but we haven't yet started to play real games with that genome, but that is in the future, probably. DNA is one of the most complicated things that I can think of, and if you've got the ability to master it and to manipulate it, you might just be interested in the DNA of a native advanced species on a particular world. They might find our DNA, our genetic material, to be very, very interesting. They might be interested in our bodies, our souls. Sounds crazy? Well, maybe I would have thought so in the past. There are cattle mutilations, animal mutilations. There are stories of human mutilations. Some of these stories are not badly researched. That's part of the picture. Who's doing them? Maybe they are. Are they interested in more than that? Well, the way I would look at it is not necessarily as a laboratory scientist who has to prove my thesis. It might be wise for us to look at it as a counterintelligence officer who's trying to understand the various possibilities here, because we may not have the luxury of waiting for proof to drop into our lap. We may have to consider a variety of possibilities here. Are they interested in our world? Well, maybe they have been interested in our world, and maybe they're willing to share it. They have up till now. But this is a very interesting place for them. Now, in my last book, I discussed an idea that I called a breakaway civilization. Thought about it a lot. I think there's something to this. Imagine that we, all of us, are part of a deeply classified group that's connected with the UFO cover-up. We're under many, many black layers of secrecy, and we've got a lot of money to play with for many, many, many years, and everyone in the room's got an IQ of 180 and higher, and we've got total secrecy to do our work. And we're also given exotic technology to start with, to study. So what could such a group accomplish in 10, 20, 30, 50 years? Well, I think it's quite possible that they might have a couple of interesting eureka moments where certain breakthroughs are made. Now, some of these breakthroughs could be segued into money-making opportunities in the defense industry, no doubt. Maybe fiber optics, maybe improvements on our integrated circuits, high tensile fibers, a lot of possibilities. But let me suggest something to you. What if some of the breakthroughs were so important, so dramatic, so transformative, that we might decide we shouldn't share these with anyone? Breakthroughs such as field propulsion, something that replaces petroleum, for instance. See, that's a game changer. And that might be something that the group decision, the majestic decision might be, that stays here. And we're going to keep developing that science, but that's going to be completely secret. Maybe developments in biotech, super longevity. I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities here. Things that are very, very fundamentally changing that would be so important they would be separate. And so what would happen? Well, the way a lot of science works is one breakthrough leads to another, can anyway, and another, and another. And then the next thing you know, if you've gotten this head start on the rest of the crew, you might just be many miles ahead. And us topsiders, maybe, the white world, is still muddling along with our rate of progress, but not the same as what's in the clandestine world. I think this is entirely possible. And I think it's entirely possible that in such a situation, they might almost develop into essentially a separate civilization. Look, in human history, we've had multiple simultaneous civilizations. You go back 500 years and we had many on Earth. They were distinct. The story of our globe, in fact, in the last 500 years, is the merging of those civilizations into a global village. But nonetheless, you can have distinct infrastructures and distinct civilizations. In particular, if this breakaway group interacts in any sense with these other intelligences in some way, giving them maybe a different cosmology, a different fundamental scientific understanding of their world, which is another important ingredient of a distinct civilization. So that's my idea, and I've introduced it into this book as well. When I think about this breakaway group, this breakaway civilization, I think of it in a sense as an invisible empire. Technology vastly better than the mainstream world. The ability to explore areas of our world that are unavailable to the rest of us. Possible interactions or encounters with non-human intelligences. I say possible. Maybe it's also possible that they are to some extent mystified by what's going on too. I think that's likely. But I also think it's possible that they have dealings. They certainly would have a deeper scientific and cosmological understanding of our reality. And possibly, let's say, I would say probably, a significant built infrastructure, maybe underground, I think is very likely, that still may be so-called, as it were, off the grid in important ways, so separate. This might well qualify them as a separate civilization, one that is broken away from our own, in effect a breakaway civilization, still interacting with our own. You come home from work, you've got your family and all of your neighbors and so forth, probably moving back and forth between these realities, I think is how it works. Certainly with a great deal of independence from the established open system, though. So I mention that because I think they're a big part of what's going to be discussed in the world after disclosure, or the world AD. My buddy Bryce and I have a chapter which we call Blowback, and one of the things we discuss is the great panic of year one. I think this is possible. Hoarding, people getting panicky, going to the stores, taking all the food off the shelves, which might trigger more hoarding, more fear, and so forth. Suspicion will certainly rule. Guns and ammo sales, I think, are going to go way up. and looting and riots can go way up, and I think that could be a big part of the first year. I'm going to get into some of these in a little more detail in a moment, but there's going to be a lot of blowback or negative repercussions for major institutions of our society. Government, obviously, a lot of loss of trust is going to occur over the deceit. Military, same thing, and now added to that, maybe the inability to protect citizens from being abducted might factor into this. Journalists are going to lose a lot of credibility. Look, they missed the greatest story of all time, or at least of our time. The scientific community, not science so much as the people doing science, are going to catch a lot of hell as having been unwilling and unable to detect the obvious presence of other beings here. Educators will have to rewrite textbooks starting today, rewriting history books, rewriting a lot of things. Religions will re-examine its beliefs about our place in the universe, not necessarily collapse. I don't think religions are going to collapse. I'll tell you why in a minute. The economy is both crisis and opportunity. I think there'll be a lot of scrambling and attempts to profit from this new reality. Industry, abandoning old technologies, seeking out new ones that can either save or destroy our world. Legal challenges, truth commissions, congressional investigations, legal action to obtain evidence of the cover-up, class action lawsuits. I think there will be several class action lawsuits. I could see abductees having a class action lawsuit, for example. Defense contractor lawsuits, that's a no-brainer. One defense contractor gets an unfair advantage over another because they had access to exotic technology that their competitor didn't have. Yeah, there's a lawsuit there. Can you sue the ETs? Can you arrest them? Well, probably not. But this may be an issue. Do you think people won't ask it? Some will ask it. The economy. I was just recently rereading some history of the FDR administration, and as many of you know, his first day in office, he announced a bank freeze. I mean, this is when the Depression was at its absolute rock bottom. Bank failures were endemic, and Roosevelt called a bank holiday. Turned out to be a very good move. Our prediction is that if there's an announcement, it'll happen on a Friday afternoon, right before the close of, before the stocks have a chance to tank, and you've got the weekend, really, to kind of recover some momentum. Nonetheless, you've got to assume there's going to be a temporary shutdown of the stock market. I could see this happening, accompanied by bank freeze as well. Panic selling, I think, would be possible. Think about petroleum. I mean, this is really the essential part of the game here. It's petroleum. I was just recently rereading a book by Bill Steinman, the book on Aztec, and it's a good book in some ways, and it's unsatisfying in some ways to me. But one thing he did is had a lot of sources about what he believes is the legitimate crash at Aztec. One of his sources, a woman, her father was at the crash, and he said to her, "This can never come out because it would destroy the petroleum industry." And I think that's really true, because whatever these things are using to fly, it's not petroleum, okay? It's something better. So whether it's controlled fusion, controlled nuclear fusion, or zero-point energy, or something even more exotic, whatever it is, it's not petroleum. And when you're talking about petroleum, you're talking about trillions of dollars are wrapped up in it. And you have to assume that, because it's the oil people, they own the world, we all know this, so they're not going to want that to change. I think a major government spending package will probably happen. I mean, something along the lines of what we're seeing already, another $1 trillion to keep people happy, to stop them from running around going crazy in the streets. Energy is a real interest in all of this, of course, and maybe it's the most important reason that this secrecy has been in place all these years. How would a new source of cheap energy change the world? I wonder if I could move this laptop over. I feel like I'm moving over. I'm going to do this. We still in business here? Good. Oh, hold on. That's okay. It's all right. I got it. Actually, I destroyed the computer. Can I have a little help here? Sorry. I need assistance. All right. Richard, never touch this again. Here, I've got this right here. Okay, that's it. That goes in here. Okay. Oh, right there. I should have known. Sorry. It's okay. As fast as I need. It's still black though. Thanks. Oh, woohoo! All right, good. I didn't like looking down this way. It was getting on my nerves. So right, a new source of cheap energy. I mean, it would change everything. If you had a portable source of cheap energy, okay. All right, it would take a while to get the whole system in place, but once it's in place, think about really what it might allow you to do. Because everything is dependent on energy. And if you have your own source of essentially cheap or almost free energy, the possibilities are almost endless, it seems to me. Whether it's going off the grid, building your own propulsive space drive, getting equipment to dig your own tunnels as far underground as you want to go, or what have you. A new type of car, field propulsion. There would be new industry to build these types of devices that would go off-world, presumably. It might be an issue. Who's going to build them, America, China, or someone else? There could be a lot of good things that come out of this energy, as well as the ability to blow up the whole world, but there are good possibilities. Worldwide electrical internet availability, environment, our history of warfare on the ecosystem to extract resources might actually, we might go over a hurdle here and actually, or turn a corner, as it were. Green electrical energy might enable us to have a massive reduction in the carbon footprint of households. I think it would. It would be easier to break down and treat waste products, most likely. Again, all of the limitations in our world today have to do with energy. And so if you have clean, cheap, abundant energy, you could do a lot of these things. It would be easier to go underground, easier to go off-world, colonize the moon, Mars. With cheap, portable energy, everything is easier. What would happen to war? This is a head-scratcher. I don't know. I think it's possible that if we all have access to cheap, abundant energy, you certainly take away some of the main motivations of warfare that has been traditionally, what's caused it. People arguing and fighting over resources. I mean, even the religious struggles like in Afghanistan, I mean, really what do they want? They want control over opium. Now they're going to want control over the $1 trillion worth of copper and other minerals under the ground. I think a lot of this comes down to money and control over resources. And if you don't need it, because if you've got cheap portable energy, you might not have as much of an incentive for having the kinds of wars that we've been having. It would probably facilitate global travel much more easily than it is today, which I think would reduce provincialism in general. One of the reasons, I think, is that we just are all stuck in our own little area and we don't get to know each other. On the other hand, we have these enormous militaries all around the world. What would they do? Would we actually disable them and close all the bases like we did a little bit in the early 90s? Or would they be used to police and population control? These are just possibilities I'm thinking of. Religions. In researching this, it occurred to me that every prediction by scientists and non-believers was that world religions are going to collapse. Religious belief systems are going to collapse. But here's the thing. There have been a number of surveys done of people, including believers and non-believers of various faiths. And the believers are all like, no, if extraterrestrials are here or if aliens are here, that's not going to take my faith away. The believers overall are pretty cool with the idea. They don't believe necessarily that aliens are here, but the idea is if they're here, that's fine. It's very possible that people who are of a strictly scientific point of view might be more deeply traumatized by this than those who have a spiritual outlook or some kind of faith. I think there's a couple of wild cards in here. The evangelical Christian outlook on this is fascinating to me. And this has become a very interesting kind of aspect of the UFO debate anyway. There's a lot of Christian UFO researchers. They're out there. They're into this topic just like anybody else. They tend to look at it and interpret it a little differently, okay? They tend to look at this as demonic activity frequently. So they're going to have an attitude about this that a lot of other people are not going to have. That's probably going to be a major political breakdown in this country in the advent of some kind of outbreak of truth on this topic. And it'll be a new political party, very likely. The ETs are demons party, essentially. Islam, on the contrary, on the other hand, might actually have an easier transition to this. Islam doesn't really have a position, so to speak, on extraterrestrial life. It's not part of the creed. But it's not hostile to the idea. There are a couple of passages in the Quran that speak of Allah ruling many worlds. And Muslims who were questioned about the idea of ET, all the ones that I've read their responses, said, yeah, this is not against Islam. So it's not necessarily a deal breaker for that religion. The Buddhists, Hindus, I don't think this is going to be a big deal for them. There's a couple of interesting religions to watch in the post-disclosure weeks and months and years. Scientology, on the one hand, only because it's explicitly one that really does deal with extraterrestrials. And so, whatever you think about the truth of it or not, because a lot of it is kind of difficult to swallow, obviously, but I would expect that it would win adherents, at least in the initial stages post-disclosure. Another one is Falun Gong in China. That's a fascinating belief system. Falun Gong only started in the early 1990s. What they believe, incidentally, is that the extraterrestrials inhabit human bodies, and they're bad, all right? So they could be all around you. Now, just imagine, all right, a belief system like that spreading. And maybe it's true, and if it's not true, then we got a problem as well, obviously. And it's one of those things, how do you prove it? But they've got, as of 10 years ago when they were shut down by the Chinese authorities, they may have had as many as 70 million adherents. And even in China, that's a lot of people. So, and I think it's a certainty that we'll be seeing new religions. I think it's a certainty that we would see some opportunist minister or priest or rabbi or some other holy person who jumps into the spotlight at the right moment, has the right thing to say, and starts some new church. I think we can expect that. I think what's also possible, I was just chatting with Bryce about this the other day, and this is in our book too. In a way, culturally, will it be kind of like a return to the 60s? And what I mean by that is, look, the 60s really started with the assassination of Kennedy, that shock. Boom, something's wrong with the world. And then with Vietnam, and the draft, and people suddenly saying, hey, I'm not happy with this society. Development of a counterculture, suspicion of the government. All of those things will happen, I believe, in a post-disclosure world. The great shock, of course, being the announcement itself. The additional shock either being a martial law or perhaps conscription of some sort. Could be a result in certain cases. There'll certainly be an anti-establishment attitude among many people. I think we can be sure of that. The idea of new vistas, new possibility. I mean, that's what the 60s was all about. At least that's one thing it was all about, is let's break out, break on through to the other side. And that leads to the next thing, hallucinogens. Okay, now, very seriously, the 60s, Timothy Leary, the apostle of LSD, it wasn't just for fun for a lot of these people, at least not in the beginning. It was an attempt to use the drug or other drugs to open those doors of perception, right? To experience the reality as it could be. All right, in an idealistic sense, I think that's how it was approached by people. Now, don't you think there would be certain drugs, ayahuasca, I've heard a lot about this lately. There are people who talk about this. You take it, you can see other entities. I don't know that that's true because I haven't tried it. But some people have tried it, and that's what they say. Don't you think it would be very likely that there would be movements to try such a thing? So in a lot of ways, I think what we would be experiencing would be a kind of challenge to our traditional society, very much in the way that the 1960s had, probably more intense, if anything. And in many ways, with all the dangers that a disclosure announcement would have, I really believe that it would result in a dramatic, I don't want to say renaissance, but because we're already constantly just in a zone here, we're not static, but I think it would heighten, it would push us into directions that we might not otherwise as quickly have gone. Science. All right, the scientists will be, after they get over their initial shock to, over having missed the boat, no 60-year-old PhD in quantum whatever is going to want to feel so stupid that he's missed out on this big thing for the last 50 years, but there you go. Okay, once they get over that, what they're going to find is that there are a lot of fascinating issues that disclosure actually very well may be able to stimulate. Fields of biology, genetics, disease prevention. Well, if you assume that ET or alien bodies are being held, the studies in biotechnology might provide lots of advances in those areas. The idea is the studies of consciousness and memory. I mean, ask yourself this. How is it that a person can get taken and not have a memory of it? What does that say about human memory? And what is our consciousness? I believe that in a post-disclosure world, this will be an issue that a lot of people are going to ask. And I think that it will promote advances in the study of the human mind. We'll be talking about gravity a lot because these objects, these craft, somehow master gravity in a way that we don't. And look, gravity is the one thing that physicists really don't quite get even today. That's why we don't have a unified field theory. And yet, isn't it possible that by grasping propulsion systems of these objects, that would be a key to understanding gravity and therefore unifying physics. There's a couple of other real puzzles that physicists ask these days. One of them is, where's the rest of the universe? Basically, less than 5% of the universe is accounted for by our various measurements. I can't do the measurements, but they can. And there's like 95% is missing, or 96%. That's why we call it dark matter and dark energy. We hypothesize about them. I don't know that disclosure will help us along the way, but maybe it will. Answers to our energy situation, zero-point energy, which maybe that's what it is, or controlled nuclear fusion. The thing about controlled nuclear fusion, it's not the same as fission in a power plant. Fission is when you rip the atom in half, and you get a lot of energy, but you also get a lot of toxic poison, radiation. Fusion is when you fuse the atoms, and we get that in an atomic bomb. But of course, that's not controlled. So the holy grail of nuclear physicists is to have a controlled laboratory example of fusion, and we've not successfully really done it. I think it's a real possibility and that we can do it, and maybe that's what these guys are using. Another of my interests for a number of years has been the possible development of artificial intelligence to the point where it surpasses human intelligence. It's not my own theory, of course. AI experts call this moment the singularity. Just like in a black hole, the singularity of a black hole is, the physics are so crazy you can't predict things. So too with the singularity, when computer intelligence becomes so advanced that we are no longer in control of the situation, we are unable to predict what will happen as a result. And that's the singularity. And AI theorists don't agree on when it's likely to happen. Some think as few as 10 years, others say 20 to 30, some say 50, 60, 80 years. All right. Most of them agree that it's going to happen. That is when machines become conscious or sentient in some way and then surpass human intelligence in many key factors. So one reason that I've firmly believed that there will be a disclosure is because the singularity is coming. When you get to a point where your computer can calculate a quadrillion number of calculations per second and talk to you like a real person and pull any bit of data off the internet like that and basically function like with an IQ of 300, all right, then the dominant intelligence on our civilization is suddenly much higher. And then if you speculate furthermore, like some AI theorists do, that we too will be interfacing with them and will be enhancing our own intelligence in various ways, well then, in that kind of a situation, I think UFO secrecy is going to go the way of the dodo bird. So the question is, when will it happen? And I've always felt that it is likely to come shortly before the singularity. So we'll get to a point where it becomes kind of obvious and there won't be any argument about it. Unless the singularity takes too long to occur. So if some of the theorists are right about it being 80 or 100 years, I still think that disclosure will happen substantially before that. Maybe within 40 or 50 years instead of 20 or 30 or something like that. Wow, I actually might time this about right. That's a first. That's a first for me. We'll see if I do it. There's the politics. I haven't really discussed that too much. Look, everyone talks about the New World Order. Well, it's coming. It can't be stopped. The only question is what it's going to look like. The world of today is not the world of 1500 or of 1000 or of the Roman Empire. It's just, we have changed. There is no way we're going to have a world in which little nation states are able to do their own thing. That's not how it is anymore. All right? So the question, though, is, do we end up with a global police state, or do we end up with a world with some semblance of freedom in it? Are we going to have a world in which we're barraged 24/7 by propaganda and corporate intelligence-controlled media outlets, or are we going to get truth? That's the battle of our age today, and that will be the battle of our age in the world after disclosure. That's not going to end. There's a very real possibility that a disclosure could end in a bad way, at least in terms of the outlook for things like human liberty. It's not necessarily something that will end in freedom and justice for all. So what will happen is we'll need to be asking, who is going to be making the most important decisions affecting our lives? How to support an ever-increasing population with more and more energy? Are we going to overwhelm the natural global ecosystem? For a couple of years now, 2 years ago, someone asked me, well, if you were president, what would you do? I thought, oh, wow, that's a good question. I think I would have a very hard time. I think we all would. But what we need, not necessarily what will happen, is a reasoned humanitarian policy or policies by responsible leaders to bring about a peaceful transition and a courageous confrontation of the truth. What does it mean? It means the United States president, and it doesn't end with the U.S. president. The U.S. is the only game in town, but let me just focus on this for a second, must reclaim constitutional authority in the name of the people, and by that simply meaning getting control over the black budget, getting control over this secret invisible empire, getting control over the right to issue executive orders to pardon people who've had secrets pertaining to ETs. There's very good reason to believe that these people, even executive orders from the president, don't liberate them from their oaths. We need a new formalized structure of power that has to be in place to meet this challenge. Call it a global federalism, to rein in the culture of runaway secrecy, because these guys are international, but governments are only acting nationally. And so really we're at a disadvantage. They've got to rein in the culture of runaway secrecy, and we've got to have a sane transition away from a petroleum-based society. Otherwise, we go down a very different path, a very dark path, and we don't want that. Then, the ultimate question is, well, these other beings. A disclosure can easily happen without them even being seen. Although it also can happen with them being seen. It could also happen with them telling us things that are true, and it can also happen with them telling us things that are lies. All of these things are possible. I've often speculated if we were time travelers going back 1,000 years, there's probably very little amount of truth that we could actually tell any earlier human people without causing them to just lose it. And that's under the best of circumstances. So we would probably want to assume that whatever we're being told by other intelligences, if that were ever to happen, would very likely be less than truthful, even if they're looking out for us. And it would be less than truthful if they're not looking out for us. I speculate on the nature of I call them majestic, the breakaway group. I wonder about them. And I wonder if it's possible that they're still attempting to deal with this, if they're scrambling to keep up, if they're able or unable to cope with the challenge that they have right now. They may understand what they're dealing with, or they may not understand what they're dealing with. And so too with us, it's very possible that in a post-disclosure world, at least for some time to come, we may or may not be a lot closer to understanding who these other beings are and what their agenda is. And this is one of the realizations that I've come to, is that we want the answer, but the answer may not be there. It may be that our secret keepers have some answers and not others. And so that I can guarantee that no matter how truthful and forthcoming any statement is, if that's the case, there's going to be an obligation on people who've continued to research and study this and be interested in this to continue to ferret out the truth. That's going to be an ongoing thing. Sometimes people joke with me and say, wow, I bet you hope that there's never a disclosure on this because then you're out of a job. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I don't think so. Not at all. In a lot of ways, our job would just be beginning because the stakes would be higher. So the book that we're writing, we haven't selected our cover, so we've got the two there, and we're playing around with that. We call it AD, After Disclosure. Again, I will just say I'm pleased with it. It's a short book by my standards. It'll be under 300 pages. But it's a neat book. I think that, here's what I think about it. It's got a lot of interesting ideas. Whether you believe in the likelihood of a disclosure or not, whether you believe in UFOs or not, I think it's an interesting read because it stimulates certain thoughts. One of the things that it would do, I think, is engage us to realize just how significant this topic is. It really would be transformative if this truth comes out. And if the truth never comes out, it's very possible that studies like this, and I hope other people give their hand at this, if the truth doesn't come out, I think studies like this will show, well, here's why it didn't come out, because it's too big a change. The thing is, though, I'm convinced that, I don't know what the trigger will be, but there's going to be a trigger. And 10 years might be a little soon, but 20 years, I think, is reasonable. 30, 40 years, I could definitely see something happening. I mean, if the whole world were to stay like 2010 forever, then fine. Then it would never happen. But see, that's the thing. It's not going to stay like 2010, is it? So we're going to keep moving down this road, continually transforming ourselves. And it's possible that by the time an event like this happens, we won't even look like this society anymore. We'll be so different, and yet most of us will still be around to see it. Well, I think I might be able to end this 2 or 3 minutes early, so I'm going to take this opportunity to thank you for your time tonight. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you. There's no, thank you. There won't be any time for questions, I understand, but I will point out that I will be here all day tomorrow. I won't be here Sunday, but I will be here all day tomorrow, and I would encourage you to come to my table and chat as long as you like. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Rich. And thank you all. That actually concludes this.